Welcome everyone to our webinar of how to win the US market by combining linear TV and connected TV for maximum performance. I am Matthias Riedel, CEO and founder of DCMN, and I have the honor to be your host today. In today's challenging environment, it is hard to find the right marketing measures to achieve your short and long-term goals as a direct-to-consumer brand. As DCMN, our mission is to create growth opportunities internationally for direct-to-consumer brands so you can relax while achieving your goals. We do that by providing frictionless international campaigns as we operate locally and globally under one P&L, which creates the highest flexibility to ensure always the best results possible. We do that also by measuring the holistic impact of creative and media with our unique data and insight solutions to squeeze out the maximum return on ad spend. We do that as well by our global workforce of over 120 marketing experts in the US, Europe, and India. Our vision is to be the most customer success-driven marketing company for direct-to-consumer brands worldwide. Today, I'm very happy to welcome you in our webinar of how to win the US market with linear TV and CTV for maximum performance and what we call Performance TV 360. If you have any questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A button under the bottom of the screen and submit your questions, which we're gonna answer at the end of the webinar. So now I want to welcome my New York colleagues, Steph, Joshua, and Bree, and I hand over to Steph.
Thank you, Matthias, and welcome everyone. So with that introduction, I do want to introduce you to the topic we plan to spend most of our time describing today, Performance TV 360. It's a method we've used countless times over the years to help different European brands successfully break into the US market. But before we dive into that, there are some terminology we want to go over just so we're on the same page throughout this webinar. First and foremost, linear TV, which we know to be the largest media reach in the US with the capability to hit over 100 million households at once. It's casting that wide, high reach type net. We tend to refer to it as traditional TV that we access mostly through a cable or satellite provider. CTV and OTT, I'll talk about hand in hand, mainly because on the next slide, I'll show you the difference in more of a physical form. We all love a good picture. But to start, through experience working with European clients, we know that CTV is the well-known term used to activate digital streaming media, but CTV is actually just a subset of OTT, which encompasses all digital streaming, where CTV is just connected televisions that include different apps to stream different content sources. CTV, or connected TVs, is also made up of smart TVs, gaming consoles, and dedicated streaming devices like an Apple TV or a Roku. Now, OTT, over the top, is described as professionally produced content that we stream over the internet, which could be watched on a lot of different devices like your desktop, mobile phone, tablet, and connected TVs. Then to move over to AVOD, which stands for ad-supported video on demand, which to summarize is really just the capabilities to run ads within content that's free. And it's really only free because we're willing to pay for those ads, pay to watch for those ads. Now, as I mentioned earlier, here's a quick snapshot of how we look at OTT and CTV differently, with OTT being that overarching term used to watch content via the internet in a lot of different ways. So, now that we have some background on terminology, I could officially introduce to you our holistic TV buying approach, Performance TV 360. This TV buying method makes sure we're hitting your target audience on TV no matter where they're watching in order to drive the most efficient results. With this approach, we do leverage that mass reach of TV and OTT's targeting capabilities to maximize conversions and ultimately use TV as a performance channel, which is crazy to hear in itself. We'll also touch on performance as well later on, just to show how the campaign was measured. So, through a conversation with our US online expert, Josh, and our offline expert, Bree, we'll demonstrate how this Performance TV 360 approach has helped European brands successfully expand into the US market, specifically using a case study that we've activated in the past with one of our own clients. So the case study we're going to walk you through is a European direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand. They began their expansion into the US at the same time they were opening storefronts, but still lack that brand power here, despite having a strong footprint in Europe. They came to us knowing they needed to make their market entry official with a media campaign to drive web visits as well as lower funnel metrics in the US. The markets in the US that they were looking to grow into were New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and the budget that they were looking at for this campaign was around $500K, and they had a timing of around Q3, which is those summer months of July to September. I do want to back up for a second because I know that $500K budget number sounds scary. Even though that was this client's budget, I do want to point out that we can activate Performance 360 campaigns with budgets lower than that figure. Lastly, they presented us with what they knew to be some main audience insights for their target, which was that they were adults 25-54, and they had this higher household income above 100K. So where did we start? How did we make a proper recommendation on media mix, budget allocation, buying strategy, and all of the details that make up a campaign? We'll walk you through how we started planning this campaign, activating this campaign, and ultimately how we measured it so the client had as many actionable insights as possible to move forward. But first and foremost, let's start with why we recommend Performance TV 360 in general. How did we even get there?
Yeah, the answer is research. Our planning formula is always going to start with research, exploring several data points like competitor landscape, audience insights, and so on. And while we can't touch on every step in today's session, we can at least start with this brief overview of media consumption, because how we consume media in the US today is a big reason why the concept of Performance TV 360 is so critical to modern marketing strategies. And so here we can see that both broadcast TV and TV streaming, or OTT as it's called in the media marketplace, are top-ranked media channels, with broadcast still outpacing streaming as of last year. However, it is important to acknowledge how TV viewing habits have evolved and are continuing to evolve over the years. Linear TV maintains its place at the top of video consumption, but is losing ground as new channels emerge and grow. And last year, as shown on the graph, over half of US households did not have a traditional TV subscription. So the key is to apply these marketplace trends to our media planning. OTT is one of those channels that Linear is now sharing space with. While 93% of the population is still watching linear TV, 74% now consume OTT. So the concept of TV is no longer just traditional TV. And you might look at OTT's unique reach here and say that's not a significant amount, but just look at that overlap. It's a whopping 67%. The takeaway being that the majority of people watching linear TV are now also spending time on streaming. With the consumers now splitting their time, we as marketers, audience chasers, have to be reaching them at multiple times throughout their day. And so we also have to split our time. But we should not rely on either medium as our sole TV channel, because while OTT has clearly overtaken some market share, it is still only about 1/3 the size of linear TV when you look at ad spend composition. And so at this point in our planning, having looked at just these three data sets alone, we know that we need to blend both channels in our media mix, linear TV and OTT, but to what degree is going to depend on specific campaign factors, particularly as they pertain to targeting, such as age group, region, psychographics, and so on. And in this particular brief that Steph introduced, we had a tech-savvy audience, a slightly younger skew, and when we pulled this research against that specific target, we basically had the Performance TV 360 approach verified. Linear TV and OTT would both be incorporated and work together as one medium. And OTT would be actually slightly heavily slightly more heavily allocated than it would be against the total population based on those research trends.
All right. And just to back up a little bit, one question we do get asked is, are people actually watching ad-supported content? Maybe they're, ad-free subscribers, and they don't, I guess really see that as so much of a possibility. But to answer the question, yes, 140 million people within the US last year watched ad-supported content. And so obviously that's crucial to us as advertisers who are looking to reach those viewers, that they're opting to watch ad-supported content, perhaps solely, perhaps in addition to their subscriptions that they're paying for. That's crucial to be aware of. And so there's three main reasons for people watching ad-supported instead of exclusively subscription-based. And the first one is subscription fatigue. So if you already subscribe to Netflix and Paramount Plus, and HBO, you might, and they don't have the movie you want to watch, you might reach for one of these ad-supported services in order to not take on another subscription and the associated costs there. The other piece might be if they're similar to the chart that Bree showed on the previous slide, they're primarily linear TV watchers, but their TV came loaded with an app, and so they reached for that free content as well to dip their toes into streaming. And then the last piece is a really significant change, and that's these premium publishers such as Netflix, Max, Disney Plus, rolling out ad-supported tiers. And so people are opting for those ad-supported tiers in order to save a little bit of budget in this case, and they're willing to watch these ads to accomplish that. Well, I have some of these publishers up, and this is just a small sample, obviously, but or anybody joining from outside the US who might not be familiar with all of them. We do have some kind of premium aggregators such as Hulu and Netflix that gather a lot of different movies and TV shows all in one place that people can watch. We have Peacock and Paramount Plus, which are a specific TV network that took all of their owned content and launched a platform with that. And then you have things like Pluto and Sling, which are a little bit more closer to a cable replacement type service. So just a little bit of background there. Another really important thing to consider, and a really significant shift that we've seen in the TV viewing landscape over the last few years is where people are watching their content. So where that experience used to be really tethered to that living room experience with the TV, the big screen TV in their living room, people are now watching it across a range of devices. And so, as advertisers, we need to be willing and able to reach them wherever they're watching their content. So if it used to just be in their living room, but now they're watching their favorite TV show on their phone during their commute, on the train, or on their tablet while waiting for an appointment, those are still valuable impressions, and it's still a dedicated viewing experience. And so this is just a different way that people are watching TV. And so when we were working on this media plan for this client, we made sure to incorporate this, that we couldn't just focus on the TV screen in the living room, that we had to reach people wherever they were watching and cast that net in order to reach them. And when we went to, during our research phase, when we went to look at which networks on the linear side, which publishers on the OTT side, obviously one of the main things that we pulled was the index. So just as a quick explanation, how likely somebody is to be watching this beyond or above the or below the average person, right? So as an example, sci-fi here, this person would be 4 times, or our target audience would be 4 times more likely to be watching sci-fi than the general population. And so this is a really crucial number for us to understand where our audience lives, what they're watching. But that is only one piece of the equation here when it comes to network and publisher selection. Another is pricing. Is key. Obviously, if we have a client that's really focused on performance, we can't be buying super expensive networks and publishers because the performance metrics will suffer as a result. And so we have to be conscientious as media buyers to make sure that we're incorporating that into our plan and tapping into these networks and publishers that meet those goals. And then the last piece is just scale. If it doesn't really matter if it's a really great fit, if very few people are watching it, it's likely not worth the energy in order to incorporate that into the plan, and it's not the best use of the approach there. And so, as you can see here, this is a selection of networks and publishers that we included in this plan. You might look at this and say, like, hey, Netflix, 206 index, twice as likely to be watching. Why wasn't that included? Same with Disney Plus. And the reason for that goes back to the pricing, that both of those publishers are both extremely expensive and don't fit well into a performance-minded plan. And on the linear side here, we chose to focus on local broadcast and a few select cable networks that were really good fits for our target audience.
Bree and Josh, I know a big question we always get in any campaign is creative. What kind of nuances should our audience, should they know in order to be aware as they enter a new market?
The first thing that comes to mind is going to be spot lengths, just because I know that's definitely different across markets, but across linear TV and OTT, the requirements are more or less the same. Both will typically use 15, 30, and sometimes even 60-second spots for the types of campaigns that we run. But for foreign brands entering the US, probably one of the most important pieces to consider is actually going to be the market differences and weighing whether it's necessary to apply any sort of localization edits on an existing spot. And this could include consideration for language. English is the majority language here, but Spanish is also very prevalent and could be even more so depending on those targeting factors we were discussing earlier. Another consideration is accents. Even if a spot is already produced in English, is there a thick accent? Does that add value to the brand's positioning through the eyes of the consumer, or will the perception be that it's more of a distraction? Actor diversity. On average, the US is a more diverse market than the EU, and the topic of diversity and inclusion is very socially relevant here. So depending on the product and targeting, this could be a critical step to success. And the list goes on: themes, imagery, local talent, etc. And there's clearly a lot to consider around creative strategies. And DCMN's creative and production team can help navigate this process and make it a little bit easier. We can identify whether any edits are even necessary in the first place. We can support with the implementation of these creative edits or even full-scale ideation and production. We can also conduct a creative test as early as the storyboard phase. And this is done using a focus group where they provide feedback and it's translated into actionable items by our in-house creative team. This can help ensure that the brand's test into the US market isn't hindered by a poorly received creative.
So just to take a quick second, I want to recap what we've talked through so far. At this point, we now have a good handle on the process. To start, we did do further research to confirm the target audience. We figured out what makes most sense in regards to media selection. We decided on a budget allocation and then now nailed down a creative strategy. As you can see here, we did end up going with the local markets the client was looking to scale: New York, San Fran, and LA. We implemented both linear and OTT to maximize reach and take advantage of targeting. We ended up on a budget split of about 74% linear and 26% OTT. Why such a drastic shift in linear versus OTT? In this case, we do have an audience that's tech savvy and higher income, which are able to hit on OTT, but linear does help us scale. And with news and bigger high reach networks ranking really high for this audience, linear ends up being on the pricier side compared to what we end up activating on OTT. So our budget does end up shifting a little bit heavier on the linear side of things. We did a mix of 15s and 30s second spots just to make sure we were maximizing frequency, but also making sure brand messaging comes across in their 30-second spot. So how did we activate? Now, what did we do next to make sure we actually put this into action?
I can start with linear, and I know we're all familiar with how we interact with linear TV as consumers, but to demonstrate how we activate a linear TV as an ad channel for this campaign, I think it's important that I first give you a quick overview of the marketplace because it is quite fragmented behind the scenes, so there are many different layers of buying decisions to make. The first of which being media type. The marketplace is divided between subscriber-based pay TV channels called cable networks and free over-the-air channels called broadcast networks. The top broadcast networks have held a long reign over the marketplace, especially as cable subscriptions have decreased over the years. So they have higher reach and are therefore more expensive. There's also a wide selection of inventory sources, which is great for us because it keeps the market competitive and allows us to build out the media plan as efficiently and opportunistically as possible. We can buy direct from the TV channels. We can buy from cable service providers. We can buy from third-party sellers, which aggregate remnant inventory from across the market and resell it as bundles to agencies at a discount. This is called unwired media. And we can buy directly from individual TV programs if they are active in a separate marketplace that we call syndication. There are two marketplaces on that note, or two inventory models, we can call them. General advertising runs on fixed CPMs, and direct response advertising runs on more of a bidding model where you're bidding on cost per spot. And lastly, there are special formats that can elevate your media schedule beyond the traditional spots and dots. And this could include broadcast events, sponsorships, integrations, and so on. But getting back to this particular campaign, we chose to air across both broadcast and cable, going both direct to the source and through aggregators. And this was based on index scores we reviewed earlier, and the need to explore some opportunistic pricing through aggregators. And we opted to activate through the direct response marketplace on the note of opportunistic pricing, because the direct response marketplace is typically about 40% more efficient than the general advertising marketplace. It also lends itself to the flexibility to optimize.
And on the OTT side, looking first at the buying model here, first option is programmatic. So this is buying in real time impressions as they become available. So rather than any sort of upfront commitment, you're saying I'm allocating this much budget, and as users log on, as they fit the target audience, you're bidding on those in real time. So if you are used to running maybe paid social or Google ads or things like that, maybe a little bit different, but the same kind of idea where it's a very agile option, and it's really easy to optimize and just really flexible, and you can shift budgets as needed and make any sort of changes you can to create the best performance. On the flip side is direct deal. So this is where you would go directly to a single publisher and say, I would like to buy a certain amount of impressions at a certain CPM or at a certain budget, and it's really locked in. And so the downside of that is it's not as optimizable, it's not as fast, but the positive is that you know exactly upfront what you are going to be paying from a CPM standpoint. And so there's, depending on what your priorities are for this campaign, there's pros and cons to both sides. When it comes to the targeting method, first option here is third-party data. So there are companies out there that aggregate data, measure different pieces of users' online activities, things like that. This could be, whether they're in market for a specific product, or what their age, their gender, where they're located, things like that, that enable you to reach the right users, that you can tap into these segments and make sure that you're targeting the correct users based on these third-party segments. The other piece is first-party data. So this is actually the data that is owned by the brand advertising. So this might be their user data from their CRM. Let's say they are an e-commerce brand that has customers that have not bought from them in a while, or mobile app that users installed and then deleted, and you want to reactivate these people. You could use this first-party data onboarded into the system and use that to reach those same users, or use it as a seed to build a lookalike audience for ideal customers. And then the last option here is contextual. So this is maybe a little bit more similar to the linear side, where it has more to do with what they're watching, though this does add in some other aspects, such as what device they're watching, where they are, potentially even the weather, things like that. That's more about the environment that they're watching this in. And so when it came to building out this client's media plan, we looked at the goals of the campaign, we looked at our research, and landed on a programmatic campaign using third-party data. And we thought this gave us the best chance to reach the right users and properly optimize throughout the campaign to make sure that we were driving the most effective results for the client.
So that all makes a lot of sense, but how in the end did we determine the campaign's impact? How did we measure this campaign in a way where the client had those actionable results that they could take and learn from?
Definitely. So yeah, I mean, measurement is the third piece of the performance TV 360 puzzle, right? So it's a really crucial question is how do you go about measuring, attributing these campaigns? And so currently linear and OTT do vary a little bit in terms of how they are measured. Linear historically has relied on spike analysis, where a baseline, an assumed number of users is built based off of historical data, and then in a short window of time after a TV spot airs, you're looking at the uplift that occurs from that. This has shifted a little bit into some IP-based measurement as well, where since more TVs are connected to the internet, you're actually able to understand which households specifically are being served this ad and see whether or not they convert after being exposed to this ad. OTT is somewhat similar to that typically, again, because it's a digital device, we're able to leverage some digital measurement in that way, typically using IPs, but that can be scaled up using device graphs as well. So for example, CTV is a household level device, right? So it's might be more than one person watching it, and each of those people might have a mobile phone. And so if they see an ad on their TV and then ultimately install an app on their phone, you need something to connect the dots there to understand that this TV impression resulted in this mobile phone install, and that's where device graphs come into play. And so what's been really cool about this increase in measurability across these channels is that it's no longer limited to looking purely at the number of impressions you received or even the completion rate or really, really high funnel metrics like that you can now measure more bottom funnel metrics, such as when an app is installed, whether somebody bought something on your website, even in app events, things like that can actually be looked at and measured and optimized off of as a result. And so how do you go about doing this? Obviously, there are third-party tools out there that can help. There is somewhat of an environment. DC Analytics does have our own in-house measurement and attribution tool called DC Analytics. And this was a pioneer in the TV tracking space when we launched it over a decade ago at this point. And we have been adding in OTT tracking capabilities as well. And so this allows you to activate a performance TV 360 campaign, leveraging both linear and OTT, and most importantly, measure it holistically to understand how these channels are interacting with each other, looking at the frequency across both as people are watching both now, and understanding how each contributes to your bottom line metrics there. And this is offered to our clients running campaigns at no cost. So that's another really great benefit.
I must admit, it's interesting to see. I've been on the linear buying side for a long time, and it feels like recent developments in the measurement space really remove the uncertainty of performance in TV and shows we could actually measure it in an actionable way. But because we love a good recap, let's go through again a quick recap of where we're at in this approach so far. So we've closed out the steps to launch. Let's bring it back to the brief and see how all of this now comes together. First and foremost, budget and timing. Linear TV came out to about $370K, where OTT was about $130K. We landed at about 4 weeks in Q3. Our audience that we looked to target was adults 25-54 in New York, San Francisco, and LA, with a household income of 100K plus. And we look to also target and add in that extra layer of tech early adopters and outdoor enthusiasts we saw were really key in this target demographic as well. When it comes to the channel selection, we ended up with linear TV targeting local news, cable, and broadcast, and OTT, we went on the programmatic route across all devices. Measurement, we use that multi-channel attribution tool, and our primary KPI was website visits, with our secondary KPI being store visits and purchases. Market research, market mediums, network selection, creative, a lot of different pieces have been applied to activate the Performance TV 360 approach so far. So how did this campaign turn out? What were the results like?
They were amazing, obviously. Because let's be honest, if they weren't, then we wouldn't be highlighting them on a webinar. But yeah, we were able to measure huge uplifts in each of their key markets. And we evaluated the campaigns holistically, including both linear TV and OTT's combined impact. And these snapshots on screen illustrate a timeline. The time period before the campaigns went live is where we derive a baseline from. And then we compare that to the response traffic during the campaign, which is highlighted in green and bookended by those red dotted lines. And you can see these huge spikes, and some of them even continue to be elevated beyond the end of the campaign, showing the long tail effect of these mediums. And while we have to keep the results of this case study campaign at this top line level for confidentiality, we can at least show you example reporting metrics that accurately match these trends. And I think that this table will actually already proactively answer some of your questions about OTT CPMs. So here we have listed the KPIs that were prioritized for this campaign, both media KPIs like CPM and frequency, as well as response KPIs like web visits and moving through the funnel down to purchases. And in our real reporting, we're breaking these KPIs down even further, looking at performance by week, creative. For linear TV, we're looking at it by time period, by channel, et cetera. But here, I'd like to highlight the relationship between CPM and cost per visit. While OTT has a higher CPM, you'll see that it generated a stronger cost per visit. And this is a crucial, and I say this maybe nerdily, exciting takeaway, because when OTT was first introduced to the market, the CPMs deterred a lot of brands from testing it, but it's gained significant traction over the years due to results trends exactly like these. To understand why the response rate for OTT is higher, we need to consider two things. First, the role that each channel is meant to play in the campaign's media mix, why they were even incorporated in the first place. For TV, that's its mass reach, generating awareness across the wider population. For OTT, that's its micro targeting, meaning ideally it's hitting the audience that's most likely to convert. So its response rates are inherently more favorable. The second is that OTT's success, and really every marketing channel's success, is not only a reflection of that one isolated marketing tactic, but of the combined effort of all channels working together. This means that OTT's response rates are elevated by TV and any other campaign that's running, and the same goes the other way around. TV's response rates are elevated by OTT and other marketing tactics as well. These spillover effects that I'm describing, from TV widening the funnel, widening the pool of consumers aware of the brand, to OTT's targeted ads and all of the other touch points in between, this spillover helps impact the direct results attributed to each ad channel, as well as the overall bottom line, which is why it's so important to evaluate these campaigns holistically in today's media market. We don't want to just look at the siloed impact of each ad channel. We want to look at the overall campaign impact. And that's why this last column overall is more important to us than each ad channel alone.
Thank you, Bree and Josh. I know that's a lot of information to talk through in the 30+ minutes we just had. We talked through our thought process within our Performance TV 360 approach. We spoke about how we went through the planning process all the way through the measurement of the campaign, and how we used two major marketing mediums, OTT and linear, to activate an effective and efficient Performance TV 360 campaign. We went through the importance of creative and how you need to consider the unique market landscapes you're entering into and make sure your creative aligns with your audience and KPIs you're trying to hit. The US is a very complex market, and it's changing every single day. It could definitely be a scary entry point for a lot of brands. We see it firsthand all the time. DCMN can really help you every step of the way if it is a market you are considering to test in the future. But with that, I will hand it over to Matthias Riedel.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Bree. Thank you, Josh, for this amazing insights. I'm always amazed. So, of course, I know a lot already what you guys already do, but I'm always like super excited hearing it again and say, wow, this is amazing. You know, what you can do in the US and how powerful it is to combine linear TV and OTT. So before we jump into the Q&A, so if you want, you know, if you have a specific question, or you say, okay, maybe now I have a more complicated thing, or I'm planning maybe to US, does the US market eventually make sense for me to go in or not? Or if you already are in the US market running campaigns there and you want to challenge your strategy, please reach out. You will get a 30 minutes free consultation from our experts here today. So please write us an email at tv360@dcmn.com, tv360 dcmn.com. And now please choose and shoot your questions. We have already some questions. So if you have questions right now to the webinar right now, please take the time, put it into the Q&A and in the Q&A form or in the chat, whatever you prefer. So, and then we start right into the question. So the first question, and I started and handed them over to the team. What are the targeting possibilities for OTT? Can you give, for an example, target group a specific regions or cities only? So it's all about target opportunities for OTT. Maybe this is for Josh.
Yeah, happy to answer. So I believe this might have been asked before we got to that slide in the presentation, so maybe it's been answered, but just to reiterate, clarify, there's a lot of different targeting possibilities available. So the three that we outlined was the third-party targeting, first-party, and contextual. Third-party is, yes, so where you would be able to, again, reach people based off of their demographics, who they are, their interests, what they're looking to buy, things like that. The little breadcrumbs that you leave around as you use the internet allows us to understand whether or not you're the right audience for us to reach. To your second point about targeting specific regions or cities, 100% possible. In fact, on the OTT side, we can target down to the postal code level. So we don't typically recommend going quite that granular because the audiences can get a little bit small. But if you do have great reason to be that specific, it's totally possible on the OTT side. So where linear is you buy by market areas, generally kind of cities. Then on OTC you can get even more specific in terms of how you reach them.
Okay, thank you, Josh. So we have another question. So how complicated is it to implement DC analytics and what steps have to be undertaken? Who wants to? I'm not sure who I guess
I can take
maybe Josh.
I can take that one as well. Yeah. So so it does depend on exactly what your goal is with setup. Of course, it depends. So if you were looking at a website, right? If you're trying to drive traffic to a specific website, that would be a pixel that gets implemented on your website that allows us to evaluate when people are arriving there and then attributing that based off of the TV performance spot. Pretty much like how most other pixels work that you're likely familiar with. If you have a mobile app, there's an integration available with any of the popular mobile measurement partners, such as Apps, Flyer, Adjust, things like that. And it's really a pretty similar setup. It's you connect these two platforms, allow them to talk to each other, and then we're receiving data of when installs or purchases or things like that happen, and we're able to attribute that based off of that data as well.
Thank you, Josh. So we have another question. Maybe this is a question for Steph and Bree. So what is the minimum budget to start to do a test performance TV campaign in the US?
I'll take that one. I kind of work as that challenger between Josh and Bree on a day-to-day basis because I worked on the linear side of things and the OTT side of things. At a minimum, we would really recommend, and Bree and Josh, we fight over this every campaign we run, with OTT and linear, at a minimum, we would suggest at least $50K per week for OTT and linear, so $100K a week for a minimum of 3 weeks. You want to just make sure at the end of the day, we could do a lower amount. I mean, there's always a number we could work with, but if you want actionable results where your money isn't really getting lit on fire and we can't really take it and grow and continue to scale, that $50K for each medium is really the minimum we recommend to make sure we're getting these kind of results, seeing frequency, seeing reach, and getting enough data to be able to make it actionable. But yeah, that would be the bare minimum on our end.
Thank you, Steph. So we have some more questions. Now questions coming in, everybody gets warmed up, that's great. So we have another question. And does each layer of targeting added to an OTT campaign make CPM increase? how to find the right balance between granular targeting and cost efficiency? I think
it's a great question.
Yes.
Yes, that's for me. Yeah, it's a great question. Yes. So to answer your question, yes. So if you layer on 5 different third-party segments and a bunch of contextual data, you will end up a very small audience size that will be very expensive to reach. And so, yes, it is always about striking that balance. And really, the only way we can do that is through experience, right? And just understanding the impact that each piece will have on it. And so if you know that you really want to target a really narrow geo, you need to be a little bit broader on the actual audience side. And just then it's keeping an eye on it. So if once you activate, if you notice that it's not achieving your goals, then you can adjust course. Again, that's relying on being a programmatic or something that is optimizable. But yeah, because ultimately, again, if you're buying programmatically, it's real time. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like until you're running. Obviously, you can have a good estimate, but you don't know the exact details. And so if you do notice that, oh, wow, we're really struggling with scale here, or CPMs are really too high, then you adjust course and loosen up targeting, expand geo, whatever, and to reach the CPMs that you need in order to achieve your goals.
Great, thank you. So we have one last question, I think. So in case everybody feels free to put your questions in. So, but for now, I think this is the last question. What's the most important for you when selecting a media vendor or channel for a specific campaign? I think this is a very broad question. So maybe we started with linear TV and then move on to OTT. Maybe Bree, you wanna take that?
Yep. So there are a lot of things that go into it. I think when it comes to which channel you want to activate, we went into that a little bit. We covered, I guess, just like the very tip of the surface there. We look at basically how relevant the channel is to the target group for the brand. We look at that brand index that Josh spoke to earlier, like the affinity for each individual channel. And then we look at the actual targeting itself, male, female skew, household income, average age. Does that all fit within our target group? We also look at the scale of the network, or I guess better described as like the reach of the network. Are there a lot of viewers there, or is it a very small network that maybe isn't quite worth the investment? And then in terms of picking the actual vendor and like who we're going to purchase that channel from, a lot of that has to do with pricing and reach. So if we have a channel that is just very, very expensive on a national scale, when we're working directly through the network themselves, but there's some backdoor ways to get that inventory through cable providers or aggregators, et cetera, that might be an instance where we'll activate that very expensive network in a little bit more efficient way, so that we, again, keep with the whole performance TV 360, brand identity. For OTT, Josh, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, a little bit. So, right. So there are a lot of similarities in terms of, yes, the research we're looking at, the affinity with this specific publisher, reach, pricing, things like that all go into our decision of whether or not to include that or not. But I will say, so one reason we typically recommend a programmatic approach for OTT when first testing in is because it allows you to cast a really wide net across a variety of publishers and understand what works and what doesn't. And so, especially if you're new to the US market, this might not be known, right? And so if you run this campaign and you're running across 20, 30, however many different publishers, and you start noticing that 1, 5, 10, however many start performing really well for you, then that might be a situation where we say, actually, this next round, we're going to set up some direct deals or something similar, and really only activate on these specific publishers that we've seen be effective. And so that's the other piece I would add, is just once you have a little bit of data, then you can start making those decisions a little bit easier.
Thank you guys. for me personally, so when we started our US operation, like 2015, so coming from Germany and the European market, knowing really well the linear TV landscape, then going into the US, I must say I've been overwhelmed by the amount of channel and the amount of ability of how to buy the media. So so it is really, really amazing what you guys doing there, because really, like, it's such, if you compare it with the European market, I think it's so much more complex and so much more bigger. So that's really really astonishing. So we have one last question, so maybe the last question for now, but now it gets really, really deep into the thing. That's really good. Thank you for the question. So what targeting parameters did you use for this particular OTT campaign besides geo-targeting? And is it necessary to use income targeting, or does OTT already skew more affluent? That's why. So maybe Josh, this is also yours. It's really about it.
Yep. I'll answer the last question first. So does OTT skew more affluent? The answer is on average, yes, currently. I do think that's changing as more people are starting to view OTT as it comes loaded on more TVs, just out of the box. And so, but on average and historically, yes, the OTT viewing audience is a little bit more affluent. And so when it came to this specific campaign, so we did do the geo-targeting, and this was a situation where we added on this third-party targeting around outdoor fans, and I think tech early adopters was the other piece. And obviously tech early adopters is going to have a little bit of a household income aspect to it as well, most likely. But kind of backing up to a previous point, this was something where, at least initially, we got a little bit too granular. And so we had to adjust course. And so, yeah, so that just bringing that back around, that again, you can't get quite so specific, at least at the point where OTT is at now, until we have even broader adoption where every single person is primarily watching OTT, and you have that same scale that you do on linear TV. You'll have to be a little bit conscientious about exactly how many layers of targeting that you're layering on.
Thank you so much. This has been super insightful. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar. So like I said, if you want to have a consultancy with our experts from our New York office, please write us an email at tv360@dcmn.com, tv360@dcmn.com. You can see it also on the slide here. And if you have any feedback for this webinar, so if you have things you liked, if you have things maybe we can improve for next time, we would really love to get your feedback. You can also use the email address tv360@dcmn.com to send your feedback in. So I have to say thank you for taking the time and joining this webinar, how to go into the US market, how to win the US market with Performance TV 360 by combining linear TV and connected TV. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Bree. Thank you, Steph, for this amazing webinar. And yeah, see you next time around. And in July, we will have new webinars coming up. So sign up for the DCMN newsletter on dcmn.com. Thank you very much.